at the bedrock of our politics will be a total allegiance to the United States of America. And through our loyalty to our country, we will rediscover our loyalty to each other. When you open your heart to patriotism, there is no room for prejudice. Whether we are black or brown or white, we all bleed the same red blood of patriots. We will reinforce old alliances and form new ones and unite the civilized world against radical Islamic terrorism, which we will eradicate completely from the face of the earth. Your voice, your hopes, and your dreams will define our American destiny. And your courage and goodness and love will forever guide us along the way. Together, we will make America strong again. We will make America wealthy again. We will make America proud again. We will make America safe again. And yes, together, we will make America great again. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless America.
The Trump effect is what I think is the deprogramming of the American mind. And I think Donald Trump's election was really electing the deprogrammer in chief. And I think there's been a lot of misunderstanding about Trump and a lot of fear about Trump. And some of the fear mongering has been intentional, but I think there's also been a lot of misunderstanding about who he is, where he comes from, and what he's trying to do. And I think if we really understand the Trump effect, we'll understand that rather than having any reason to be fearful of a Trump presidency, we have a great opportunity to be happy that we're going to have a president who's going to enable us to relax and not be feared. Because in fact, we've been living in fear, in my opinion, since September 11th, 2001. And the destruction of the World Trade Center, the attack on the Pentagon, showed America is terribly vulnerable despite spending trillions of dollars on national defense. And there has been no successful response in over 15 years. And Trump, coming from New York City, represents the very geographical location which came to symbolize 9/11. And coming from the construction industry, obviously represents the very industry that was most affected by 9/11. He builds high office towers and hotels and giant monumental buildings, and that's what was attacked by our enemies, Al-Qaeda on 9/11. So I think his running for president is symbolic, it's personal. He's from New York. He's not really a traditional Republican. He was a Democrat most of his life. He's not a born-again Christian. He's some kind of moderate Presbyterian. He's been married several times. He's certainly not a racist. He had Muhammad Ali at one of his weddings. He had Michael Jackson living in his building. By any normal evaluation, a New York liberal on the liberal end of the spectrum. As far as being anti-gay, you can see, as somebody joked on the internet, just from the way Trump Tower is decorated, that he must know some gay decorators. So that there's no question that he's not a bigot, he's not a racist, he's not a homophobe, he's not an Islamophobe. He himself says he has Muslim business partners. He has projects in Muslim countries. He's not isolationist. When people say, oh, Trump is an isolationist, he failed to say that his hotel chain is called Trump International Hotels. He's got an international business which operates internationally. You can't be an internationalist and an isolationist at the same time. So one after another, the misconceptions about Trump need to be dispelled. And I think people really have to realize what Trump is most of all is a realist. And until now, I'd say from 9/11 to now, the country has been living under a series of fantasies and not had a realistic leader, whether it was President Bush, whether it was President Obama. Trump represents a realist approach, a non-ideological approach, when we previously had ideologues of various stripes And so that's why I want to say, in my opinion, because Scott Adams says he's the hypnotist in chief, and others say the persuader in chief. But I think what's important is his role to me as a deprogrammer, because I think Americans have somehow been programmed, indoctrinated, sort of fed a lot of fantasy ideology, whether in schools, whether in the media, whether in their politics. And he represents a non-ideological, practical approach that is very much in keeping with a New York business background. It's very much in keeping with, funnily enough, a tradition of the old Democratic Party pre-1968. And I think you can explain a lot of what he's doing by looking at those non-programmed aspects of his person. In other words, he's not programmed, he is who he is. And that's what's so interesting. He's never worked for anybody else. It's always been the family company or himself. He's never lived in anybody else's property until now. I mean, I think he may have had an apartment in New York, but they didn't know. But basically, he's lived in Trump properties until now. And so, just paradoxically, he was the right man at the right time because he wasn't cumbered by all the restraints other people had. He didn't have to go through pleasing bosses. He didn't have to go through pleasing superiors. He could do what he wanted to do the way he wanted to do it, which is really very much of an individualistic approach that Americans used to have. That was American individualism. That was Yankee know-how, Yankee ingenuity, and he sort of embodies that pre-1960s tradition of America, and hopefully he will be able to break the spell that we've been living under, because until now I think we've been subject to a lot of misconceptions. Why do I say deprogrammer in chief? Because if you look at the literature on indoctrination, mind control, brainwashing, and so forth, you find that the techniques Trump's using are the same techniques used by deprogrammers. First, they have to discredit the cult leader. If somebody's following a cult, and I don't want to specify any particular cult, but the deprogrammer, they take the person away from the cult, they usually put them in a safe house or whatever, and they first try to discredit the leader by telling you terrible things about the leader. Well, he did it with the Clintons, and he did it with the Bushes, both. And he did it with President Obama, where you personally discredit the leader. The second step is then you show the contradictions between what they say and what they're going to do on a policy or action level. So again, he did that. And I think that's where the tweets come in. He's constantly showing you some contradiction over and over and over again, bombarding the public with this information, part of a deprogramming strategy. The third stage, and which is the tipping point in this, is that you have to get the cult member who's being deprogrammed to recognize reality. In other words, the cult creates a fantasy world that you live in. Once the cult follower is shown the leader can't be trusted, that the policies make no sense, and then is exposed to what reality is, the former cult person can begin to think for him or herself. And so Trump has really been carrying out this experiment in deprogramming the whole country because, frankly, we have been fed a lot of fantasies up until now, since 9/11, which was a tremendous trauma. No one knew how to deal with it. People couldn't face reality, whether you had Bush saying Islam is peace, everyone wants democracy, we're going to go and it's going to be like the Wicked Witch of the West, and they're going to sing The Witch is Dead, and everyone's going to live happily ever after, which didn't happen. Trillions of dollars for that. Or you had Barack Obama saying equally unrealistic things about he would pull out the troops and the world would see we're not anti-Islam, so then everyone would be nice to us. That didn't happen either. I think Trump goes, let's just deal with things as they are. Let's find out what's really going on and try and isolate the problems and fix them. Because this is what you do. If you're building and the HVAC doesn't work, you got to go and find the compressor out and replace it, and then it can work again. So I think that practical approach is something that is very real. That's where we are now. He's trying to get the country to face reality. And I think there's this resistance. It's funny, the term is resistance. The originators of it, of course, were thinking of the French Revolution, French resistance to the Nazis. But in fact, you could argue there's a psychological dimension to resistance. Because in psychotherapy, there's a stage of resistance where the Anna Lasand is resisting facing reality. And so what you have, everyone in the resistance is actually resisting reality. They don't want reality, because reality is much scarier than the fantasy world, because it means America does have enemies. It means there are economic problems. It means there is violence in the inner cities. All these things that you've sort of ignored or wished away or denied are right there, and you have to confront them. Trump says we can fix them, but first you have to realize what the problems are before they can be fixed. So this resistance is actually an interesting word, because it tells you a lot about the psychology of Trump's opposition as well as of Trump's himself. They're almost adapting to his role as deprogrammer by resisting him. So Trump's role will be to overcome this resistance. Once the resistance is overcome, his opponents can recognize reality, then people can work together, I believe, fix the problem. So I'm personally optimistic if he can get through this bumpy non-honeymoon period and actually begin working to solve problems. I think it could be a very productive presidency, because he's non-ideological, he's not really right-wing, he's not really a Republican, practical result-oriented. He's not Hitler. Everything he's done has been purely democratic. If anything, the other side, with riots, disruptions, has been behaving more like Nazis. So I think we'll see step by step. The Trump effect is going to be very powerful. We've already seen it. The Trump effect at the border, where illegal immigration is already down just in a few days, just by him being elected. We've seen the stock market is up, again, just by being elected. That's the Trump effect. And I assume this effect will continue as we go forward. I'm hoping that it won't be too difficult at deprogramming. But that's what we're really talking about, the difference between coming out of a fantasy world and moving into a world of reality. And if anything, Trump is a very realistic figure, at least in my perception, not having met him. But I come from New York City, and I've seen his buildings. And I think it's interesting what's happening is the New York values he talks about are real values. I mean, it's interesting when that came up in the debate, Cruz tries to use against Trump to work for Trump. It's a shame that the people in New York are more loyal to their ideology, to their fantasy, and to their political delusions than they are to geography and history, which would say root for the home team. We've got a New Yorker in the White House. People from New York should support him just as rooting for the home team. So that'll be interesting to see if he can pull that off by the next election, because that's traditionally you root for the favorite son. And if there's one thing about Trump, he's really from New York. Another thing about Trump, which is interesting, is he sort of represents the un-university. I mean, they say he got a lot of working class support, people who are not highly educated support him. But what that means is people who were not indoctrinated. Since 1968, the universities have pretty much become a closed shop. Alan Bloom wrote The Closing of the American Mind in 1987, complaining about what's happening in the universities. And certainly in the last few years, any of the old curmudgeonly professors who were individualists have disappeared, and you have basically a cadre who came of age in the 60s and believed the Weathermen or the Black Panthers or the FALN or Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, Yasser Arafat, you name it. They believe the purpose of the university is to promote the revolution, and they believe that communism is good. I was at a talk at a bookstore in Washington by a novelist who wrote a book about Sunnyside, New York in Queens, which is a communist neighborhood, and it had been reviewed by a Chinese-American refugee from communism who said, oh, this is a great book because it shows how frightening communists are. And so he said in his talk, oh, I don't want anyone to think that there's anything wrong with communism at all. And so that's basically the gestalt, I think, in American universities at the highest level, that there are very few people who are willing to say there's anything wrong with communism at all. Luckily, Trump spent his whole life in the construction industry. He doesn't have any problem saying there's something wrong with communism or any other totalitarian ideology. And so what you're seeing now is, for the first time, somebody who has no particular allegiance or obligation to that constituency group. Right before election night, there was an item on BBC with Martin Amis and Ann Coulter debating the upcoming election. She said Trump's going to win tomorrow. Amis didn't seem to think so. But he said, oh, it's been a terrible effect Donald Trump has had on the American people because people have become disinhibited by what Trump has said. Now, what did that mean? That meant people felt free to say what they were thinking. Ann Coulter thought that was a good thing. But what's more important in terms of the Trump effect is that is actually the definition of a liberating effect. If you're freed, you're liberated. So people have not been disinhibited, people have been liberated. Or you could say people have been encouraged. In other words, they've been given the courage to express themselves. Because previously people had been inhibited, which means they've been intimidated. And that means we had been living in a very intimidating environment where people were afraid to speak. Well, that's not the definition of a free society. That's the definition of a fear society. Nathan Sharansky gave some book to Bush right after 9/11, Fear Societies versus Free Societies. Well, the net result of Bush's response to 9/11 and Obama's was to turn the United States into a fear society, where people were afraid to speak, to say the wrong thing. They were afraid somebody would be reading their emails. Somebody would be listening to their phone calls. They were afraid people would be overhearing what they said in restaurants. They were afraid if they said one wrong thing at work, they would lose their jobs. Well, what country does that sound like? It sounds like the former Soviet Union. It sounds like fascist Italy or Nazi Germany. It does not sound like the land of the free and the home of the brave. And Trump's actual ability to speak freely and not back down encourages people and liberates them, and they go, hey, if he can do it, I can do it too. Because if you read any of the literature on totalitarianism, whether Arthur Koestler's Darkness at Noon, or George Orwell's 1984, or even Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, it only takes one person who you can see standing up to the authorities to encourage many, many others. So that also is sort of interesting. Trump, far from being a Hitler figure, is a liberator. And you can even say that Twitter plays into that, because one of the things about Twitter was, here was this mechanism which was used by the United States for the so-called color revolutions around the world and for the so-called Arab Spring, that, oh, we're going to mobilize the people using Twitter. And Trump came and said, hey, we can have a Twitter revolution right here in the United States. I'll just tweet. And he just did it. So it's like the Nike ad, just do it. He just did it. And when people said he did it, I mean, it got to the point that Twitter started censoring people. It wasn't actually a business decision. It was a political decision. But it's very interesting because they tried to censor Trump, but they couldn't. So he showed one guy can get away with it. Because up until Trump, everybody had somehow been shut up. But Trump wasn't shut up. So he went on to become president. Now other people go, I can be free too. So I think that is also the Trump effect, as a liberating effect. Political correctness, you want to talk about the universities, which has been dominant in the universities, say at least since 1987 till today, for the first time has somebody in a position of authority who is willing to say, in the words of La Pasionaria, no pasaran. You know, I mean, everything's been sort of reversed. The revolutionary, the liberator, is Trump. The oppressor is all the establishment in the United States, which no doubt is very similar to the nomenclatura in the former Soviet Union before Boris Yeltsin and the collapse of communism. So I think that is a way of understanding what Trump represents in that sort of effect vis-a-vis PC. Like Reagan, Trump is a media personality. He came out of television. He had a series, The Celebrity Apprentice. He's lived his life as a celebrity. He's been on Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. He was on the front page of the New York Post when he was young, part of the Studio 54 crowd, glamorous, high life. I think he'd be a natural for the media to embrace. He's had provided a lot of copy, a lot of newspaper editors over the years. But strangely, despite being an actual celebrity himself, the celebrities turned against him. Now why? Well, it's the same thing. He's a dissident. He's gone against the orthodoxy. He's like as if he were a Communist Party member who left the party. That's the worst possible thing you can be, is somebody who knows them and rejects them. He's like a former member of the cult who left the cult. And nobody is more to be despised than a former cult member who turns on you. This was true of ex-communists, it's true of ex-Scientologists, it's true of ex-Hare Krishna, it's true of ex-Moonies, whoever. The person who leaves the cult is a danger to the whole cult because it shows you can survive without the cult. So what do you need to be in the cult for in the first place? Well, maybe if I'm in the media, I don't have to be a leftist, you know? Well, that won't do. So I think that's part of the reason, is the cult nature of the media. The second thing with the media is they're very politically correct in general, and just by not being politically correct, he creates an irritation. And in a way, it's interesting because they can't ignore him. The normal thing is you just ignore people. I mean, how many pictures has Augustine made, and how many of them have been shown on television? You know, none. And what, a dozen. And the reason is you don't exist if you're not part of the party, so to speak. But with Trump, he can't be ignored because he has billions of dollars, he has hotels, he can buy time. And they tried all the usual things. They took away the Miss Universe pageant, boycotted his ties at Macy's, basically tried to make life impossible, and he just kept going. So they tried to have boycotts of his hotels, but it didn't stop him. So the usual tricks didn't work, and that's another reason the media is against him. Again, you have to put on your cap. If the media were just a business, and he gets ratings, and he gets copy, and he gets attention, and he's an entertainer, and he's a celebrity, and people watch, what's wrong with that? Why not give him more airtime? Why not praise him? Why not celebrate him? Because their view is, we made you, we can break you. Well, we'll see. Maybe they didn't make him. Maybe he had another identity due to his real estate empire. And maybe they can't break him. I mean, we'll see what happens. That's has yet to be determined. But I would give him a pretty good shot. The other thing about the media that's sort of interesting is these days, the media, you know, he didn't get any major newspaper endorsements. He didn't get any endorsements from any media outlets, really. A handful you can count on a few fingers. Their authority and legitimacy is sort of on the line. And what happened, what changed was newspapers used to be aimed at everybody. The whole idea was something for everyone. Even the New York Times had genuine op-eds that were opposed to their editorials. The op-eds were published because of Mobil Corporation paying for the op-ed page during the first OPEC boycott. But they had William Safire, who really did work for Nixon and really was more conservative than your average columnist in the New York Times. And they had a few tokens there, even in the most liberal newspapers, because some of their readers and some of their advertisers might not agree with them. So even myself, during the PBS debate, they published my op-ed in the New York Times, admittedly after the vote was taken, so it wouldn't help. But it was in the newspaper of record because they go, well, we have to represent both sides. I don't think they feel that sense of fair play at all operational today. Much more partisan. I think this is a result of people in the media now being mostly college educated, many with graduate degrees in places like the Columbia School of Journalism. And they're writing for their professors and trying to be educated. And the problem is the educational institutions have defined being an educated person these days in a different way. So instead of being open-minded, skeptical, trying to see the wide variety of opinions, truly a liberal education. Liberal, by the way, means free. What liberal has come to mean now is, again, following the party line. That's all political correctness is. And looking for deviations from the party line. So the role of the media becomes much more what it would be in a totalitarian country, where it's simply to denounce and humiliate and insult those who deviate from the party line. Usually the 2 minutes of hate or whatever from Orwell's 1984, but that's what they do in any totalitarian country. And that's what they see their role as. So they're not really working for their subscribers to provide them the information they need to make informed decisions on their own. They're truly party organs. That is because it reflects the university being taken over. I was talking to someone I know, and she said, we used to talk about the laboratory of the states being the laboratories of democracy. You can argue that the universities now, the laboratories of the universities, are the laboratories of totalitarianism. So any crazy idea, whether it's white privilege or heteronormativity or deconstruction, whatever it is, transgender rights, they start in the university. They're tried out there. Microaggressions is the latest, safe spaces, you name it, and they're tried out in the university as a pilot program, and they're sort of perfected, and they're rolled out system-wide for the whole country subsequently. And so the things we see now in our society, things that were discussed and worked on in universities years ago, universities not working as true liberal institutions with truly diverse faculty looking at a wide viewpoint, but rather as, I like to say, the higher party school, where they're just refining the party program to be implemented by the organs after the center decides. So you actually have a neo-Soviet model of education. And that's why you find they can't criticize communism. And it's all based on party lines. So take Islam. Islam is now considered good, but it's quite possible if the center changes its view subsequently, it will be considered bad. You only have to go back to the 1930s and remember that the Communist Party was pro-Nazi while they had the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and it became anti-Nazi after the attack on the Soviet Union. So the party members flipped, and they went from being isolationist to interventionist. So, I mean, you can imagine a similar thing happening. The party line is not based on reason, it's based on the unquestioning obedience to the center and whatever the center decides. And how those decisions are made and who is in the center is still a mystery to me, but it's quite clear when you have universities that have former weathermen on their faculty and Black Panthers on their faculty, that people are not being chosen on the basis of contributions to the scholarly literature alone. You know, that there's some political dynamic which would not be unknown to people in other countries. And one of the things about living in the former Soviet Union is now, of course, they hate communism. So you go to Russia, they hate it, and they hate feminism, and they hate all the things, they hate political correctness, because they suffered under it for 70 years. But unfortunately, until Trump, we were suffering under it. So the media reflects the ideological project of the educational establishment, which is unfortunately dominated by the left, the ultra-left, and the loony left. So there is no, I mean, they did some study, like the law schools, which used to have a lot of Republicans. They don't have Republicans or conservatives on the faculty anymore. Somebody went to the, I think Glenn Reynolds wrote about this on his blog, went to the American Association of Legal Education, or whatever it's called, and said, under diversity, shouldn't we have a diversity program for conservative lawyers and faculties? And they so far haven't gotten any response. So it's pretty much, you know, it's defined as, if you want to teach, you have to be on the left. The problem with that is it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's got nothing to do with education. It's very, very dangerous for society to let any one group of people take over. That's where Trump comes in, why they hate Trump, because he doesn't care, you know. But the point is, universities are very important because they train your next generation of judges is going to be educated at university. Next generation of government officials is going to come out of university. The teachers come out of the university. So everybody who makes fun of people who, and this is a problem with the conservative movement, at least part of, yeah, who cares what happens at university? What are you going to do with a degree in women's studies? Well, the people with a degree in women's studies are going to be, first of all, the diversity officer at your Fortune 500 company and making policy on hiring and firing and promotion and controlling the cadre formation there. They're going to be making the laws, they're going to be on the courts, and they're going to be running your businesses, and they're going to be controlling your destiny as government officials as well. So it's not a joke. So it becomes an issue because what seems like a very arcane argument in the Modern Language Association about whether gender is socially constructed or biological, you know, becomes a fight between English departments and biology departments, as Camille Paglia talks about. You know, the English departments won, but the biology hasn't changed. So you can be for evolution and Darwin in some fields, but not in others. So if you say Darwin believed there were two sexes and sexual reproduction was necessary for the continuance of the species, that's now, you could get fired for saying that in many universities, certainly in English departments. Yet it's in Darwin. So what do you do? So what they do is they ignore that. How does that relate to Trump? Here's how. Trump ran a beauty pageant. There is nothing more horrifying to feminists than beauty pageants. It's a symbol of male oppression. Now, he could say, well, it's just the opposite. The most beautiful woman has the most power over men, which may well be the case. But nothing is more politically incorrect than a beauty pageant. Trump is the president who owned beauty pageants. And that's the Trump effect. Beauty is now okay again. Under President Obama, official line was ugly was good. And you had Lena Dunham, who was not an attractive woman, made into a star and given a series, and there were some quite unattractive people who were promoted. I mean, I would even argue the tattooing and all the stuff that went with it, the disfiguring of the body, that was all to make people as ugly as possible, to show that beauty was not a factor, which it's been a factor forever and will be, because like we were talking about taste, you want a beautiful room, you want a beautiful hotel, you want a beautiful platter of food, and you want people around you to look good. I mean, it's a human desire for beauty, and that desire for beauty is politically incorrect because it's counter-revolutionary. That's where Trump effect again comes. People are looking good. What's interesting about Trump is the hotel he built in Washington, which I know you all have been to, and I went to. And one of the most striking things about it when you go there is that it's in very good taste. It is not garish, it is not overblown, it is not overdone. It doesn't look like Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, even though that's a competing casino. It has a very relaxed, tasteful, and friendly vibe, really. That it's welcoming, and everything is sort of where it ought to be. There's plenty of couches and places to sit. You can have a meal at the bar if you don't have so much money. You can go to an expensive restaurant if you have more money. And what's most significant about it to me is it was like it was done very economically. If you look, there's just a couple of chandeliers hanging from pre-existing structural steel beams, a few little bits of textile for accents, but it didn't actually look like they broke the bank during the renovation, although it had a very nice effect. So you got a lot of bang for the buck. And you go, what difference does that make? Well, that's how he renovates his property. If he carries the same principles forward to the country, it's going to be very nice. Now, one of the things I say, Ivanka was the decorator on the hotel. All the better, you know, because all this, he hates women. You wouldn't put your daughter in charge of a project if you didn't like women doing things. And of course, the Trump business, if you look on Wikipedia, the Trump company was actually founded by his grandmother when his grandfather died, and she ran the company as a real estate business, and it was a woman-owned business from the get-go, the Trump organization. So he's actually just the heir to a woman-owned enterprise, which he continued to build up. So again, from the woman's point of view, Trump not only likes women and likes women in business and has his family going into business as women, but he is the custodian of a trust that is a multi-generational aspect of women in business in his family. So on every level, the business reflects a vision for what he's going to do as president. I think it's pretty positive. And the issue of taste comes up because what is taste? And what does taste have to do with politics or society? Something people don't talk about anymore. But taste is that sort of indescribable element that elevates an experience. So that if you're in a place, you know it when you see it, and you go, hey, this is in good taste. if this person has good taste with this, he has good taste with something else, it means he has good judgment. So we can say, we do have a test. Anyone can go in the lobby and see what kind of judgments, what kind of decisions does Trump make. Not bad. So the hotel is an advertisement for his decision-making ability. And the extra lagniappe, which they have to add, is the Trump Hotel used to be where the National Endowment for the Arts and National Endowment for the Humanities was located, in the old post office. So it was a bureaucracy in succession to a previous bureaucracy. And I was in it when it was the NEA and NEH headquarters. And it was a very sad, bureaucratic, ugly place. They had a public conference room that was designed by a famous architect that was very depressing. And it was just a downbeat, dreary, dead, dull, depressing, despondent dungeon. And now it's been transformed into a place you would love to go and have a good time. So that shows, again, how good taste can transform an arts bureaucracy into a lovely hotel. If he can do that with all the other federal bureaucracies, we'll be in great shape. That's the Trump effect, again. There's more to it than just the economy. I think he actually is a patriot. I think he believes in America. I think he is in a unique position because, first of all, he's not anti-immigrant. His mother was an immigrant. Wives were immigrants. And I believe he likes immigrants. And he believes they contribute to America. Our first lady is an immigrant. The first one, I think, in a very, very long time. And I think also some of the patriotism, again, I don't know him, I never met him, comes from the fact that he's half German-American. Because German Americans are our largest immigrant group, descendant of immigrants in America. And they have had a very difficult acculturation process because we've had two major wars in the last century against Germany. World War I and World War II. There was anti-German sentiment and there were anti-German measures. And Germans had to continually prove their loyalty to the United States. Not unlike people are asking Muslim Americans to do today. So he is quite aware of the pressures on any sort of ethnic group in the United States in a time of war. And what he shows is, yes, German Americans can be loyal Americans. Certainly in World War II, Eisenhower was a German American. Nimitz was a German American. There are plenty of German Americans fighting the Nazis for the United States. But they were patriotic Americans of German ancestry. Similarly, Muslim Americans can fight for the United States against ISIS. I'm sure he's quite happy for that. But they have to be patriotic Americans fighting for American victory. So I think this awareness comes from being a German American as well, and is something that's very important in this calculation. And far from being Hitler, he's an anti-Hitler. And his motivation, again, like someone I know told me, he's 70 years old. If you're Hitler, you don't start at 70 in politics, you know, you start in your 20s. There's nothing but a downside, really. People are going to take pot shots at you. They're going to tap your phone. They're going to bug you when they talk to you. They're going to release embarrassing things. So you have to be willing to put up with that. And I honestly believe it's a genuine love of country and a genuine patriotism, which he wants to share with other immigrant groups, saying, look at us. If we German Americans can now be the most loyal and patriotic Americans, so can any group in the United States. So I'd say he does believe in the melting pot. He does believe in the pre-1960s vision of American pluralism, as opposed to the post-1960s version of so-called multiculturalism. Rather than being about ideology, it's about character, it's about patriotism, it's about love of country, and it's about a personal commitment to, hey, I can fix this, because I know what it's like to be marginalized, othered, people are suspicious, uncomfortable. His family, according to press reports, pretended to be Swedish in New York when renting out apartments because they had so many Jewish customers renting in the building. They didn't want to put them off by saying they were German Americans, so they were Swedish Americans. So he even had to pass for another kind of Nordic immigrant ancestry. So I think that's also significant. And it's, again, it's a positive. It's not a negative. So it's all good, you know? And I think that's something that, again, we'll see as it goes forward. Anyone looking for American nativism isn't going to find it. Instead, you're going to find a person who really believes in the melting pot. I mean, and I think that's a good thing. A big portion of the Jewish community is pro-Trump, namely the Orthodox Jewish community. The religious Jews are very pro-Trump. And in fact, Trump's daughter, Ivanka, was converted by an Orthodox rabbi in New York, according to reports. Haskell Lookstein, who turns out his father was my grandmother's rabbi at an East Side synagogue. So my grandmother was Orthodox. So very, very frum, as we say. Probably she knows how to keep a kosher home, make Shabbos and all the rest. Grandson had a bris and he was in attendance. So that's very strict. So that portion of the Jewish community, the Orthodox portion, obviously would not have a problem. And his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is from an Orthodox family as well, in New Jersey. The other part of the Jewish community, the non-Orthodox part, Reform Jews and conservative Jews, and atheist Jews who aren't really practicing the religion at all, but identify as an ethnic group. Well, one is they tend to be liberal, they tend to be Democrats. Trump is, well, not a traditional conservative, really, and not a traditional Republican. Just by running as a Republican, you lose a fair number there. And secondly, I do think that, and I think it's very, very bad, that Jewish organizations have worked with the Democratic Party to stoke fears and create panic by emphasizing dangers to the Jewish community, which may or may not have even come from Trump supporters at all. Death threats, bomb threats, etc. At least one case, the person arrested was a left-wing African-American, reportedly a convert to Islam in St. Louis, who had worked in the media for NPR, reportedly in Chicago, and for various internet publications. He was arrested for 8 of these bomb threats. We don't know how many he may or may not have made. And being in St. Louis, whether or not he was the one who toppled the tombstones in the St. Louis cemetery or not. But suddenly, that wasn't an issue, and we didn't hear denunciations of the left. We didn't hear calls on the left to denounce and disavow this sort of thing. The problem is that many Jewish organizations today are controlled by people who are basically Democratic Party activists and whose loyalty is to the Democratic Party rather than the well-being of the Jewish people. Trump is pro-Israel. Trump is in his family life pro-Jewish. His policies tend to be pro-Jewish. You'd at least want to give him benefit of the doubt, but many Jewish organizations have actively attacked him. And in a funny way, it repeats. History repeats itself. First time tragedy, second time farce, as the Marxists say, which may or may not be true, but in this case it seems true because in the 1930s and 40s, Jewish organizations supported Franklin Roosevelt putting quotas and excluding Jews and keeping them out of the country, and they died as a result. And now Jewish groups support bringing in anti-Israel Muslim fundamentalists, some of whom are clearly anti-Semitic, some of whom may actually commit terrorism against Jewish schools. We've had Jewish schools attacked. We've had Jewish organizations attacked. And yet there's a strange silence. And then you have Jewish organizations turning a blind eye to the activities of Palestinian convicted terrorists in the leadership of the Women's March, Linda Sarsour and Ms. O'Day. And again, no request or demand to disavow and denounce. No comment. So it's okay, because silence is acquiescence, as they said in the AIDS activism community. You know, silence equals death. In this case, silence equals death, death of Jews. So basically, a major group, the Anti-Defamation League, has said they'll choose political partisanship over their express purpose, which is to prevent defamation of Jews, by allowing people who've defamed the Jewish state and Jews to continue this and have no criticism. So it's almost a topsy-turvy world, literally Orwellian. A friend of the Jews is criticized as Hitler. People who follow Hitlerian policies are, at a minimum, greeted with silence and at a maximum with support. by Jewish organizations, including Black Lives Matter, which had many known anti-Semites involved, including Al Sharpton, who organized a pogrom in New York, which is what led to Mayor Giuliani being elected. You have this type of thing where it's not even a double standard, it's a single standard. Pro-Jewish conservatives are accused of anti-Semitism. Anti-Jewish leftists are supported. Why? Because the loyalty of some of these Jewish organization individuals is to the Democratic Party, which unfortunately has been taken over, in my opinion, and I think you've seen it in this campaign, by the most extreme 1960s leftist elements. So the moderate Democrats are the Trump voters, honestly. You know, they're the Reagan Democrats, and even probably the Hubert Humphrey Democrats, and probably Clinton vote. I mean, we know Obama voters voted for Trump. They've done studies. I mean, I can say myself, I voted for Obama the first time, and I voted for Trump the first time. So I didn't vote for Obama the second time. But the point is, so I know from my own experience, Trump has recruited Obama voters. So the moderate Democratic voter is squeezed out of the Democratic Party by the ultra-left leadership, which for some reason doesn't seem to be in any danger of being replaced. David Horowitz told me is a Stalinist party, the Democratic Party now. Well, many Jews in the Soviet Union were loyal to Stalin, and he was anti-Semitic. The doctor's plot, attacks on the joint, etc. So it was Ronald Reagan who got Jews out of Russia. So, I mean, you know, history does repeat itself. Stalinist Jews are Stalinist Jews. There, here, then, now. And I don't think Trump's going to win them over. But what Trump can do is make them less of a factor as he can go around with Israel, work with the Jewish community that's not Stalinist. Success breeds success, you know, so the more successful he is, the less strong his opposition will be. That's with the Jewish community. And then it relates to the refugee issue, because again, paradoxically, his refugee policy is good for the Jews, and it's good for all Americans, because you don't want to bring in people who want to kill you, who want to blow you up, who want to destroy your buildings, who want to make life difficult. And yet Jewish groups are saying, bring in what are essentially, possibly, Nazi equivalents of today, because they're refugees. Well, guess what? The Nazis themselves were refugees. After World War II, a large number of Nazis had nowhere to go. They were getting out of Germany because they were afraid they would be arrested. And they went on a so-called rat line to Latin America with help from the Vatican and others. So among famous Nazi refugees was Adolf Eichmann, who went to Argentina, and Dr. Mengele. So, you know, they were refugees. What does that prove? It doesn't mean all refugees are Nazis, but it means some refugees might be. And anybody taking a reasonable approach to the issue would have to say Trump's call for so-called heavy vetting, which is a funny term, is not unreasonable. Just who are these people? What do they want to do? And so forth. And the fact that Jewish groups are opposing this, again, shows the, I would say, Stalinist. It's more important to bring in cadre to help overthrow the United States than it is to reasonably process people and determine whether they're a threat to the security of the country or not, to the best of your ability. So, and on the refugee issue as a whole, again, illegal immigration has gone down simply by Trump saying, I want to do something about it, and simply by Trump saying, I want to do something about radical Islamic terrorists coming to the country. It puts pressure on countries to take care of it because they don't want their immigration cut off. So he put 7 countries on the list. Every country goes, now let's see what can we do so we don't get on this list. So it's a very good policy to make it not necessary to put limitations on any other country. Because now every country with a terrorism problem will say, we better take care of our problem so that we can have the benefits of our own people, including our own family and friends, going to the United States for a shopping trip, or going to study, or having a second house in Las Vegas, or whatever it is you want, Orlando. And again, it's common sense. Why wasn't it done before? Political correctness. Trump's approach is non-ideological. His opponents are purely ideological. They actually have no common sense basis, no reasonable basis, only an ideological basis. You're an Islamophobe if you limit immigration, even though we've had religious tests. The most famous is, in immigration law, there's a special preference for Irish immigrants. Ireland is a majority Catholic country, so you're talking about a Catholic preference. 50,000, I believe, the last time I checked, a year of a special quota. Teddy Kennedy got it into the law for Ireland to come to the United States with immigration visas. We had it with Cubans until President Obama ended it there. We had it with Soviet Jews, either for or against deciding who can benefit the United States and who would be a danger to the United States. That's perfectly reasonable. And again, I think the realistic approach, the practical approach, is the Trump approach. The fantasy approach, the ideological approach, is that of his opponents. And unfortunately, Jewish groups who should know better are dealing with fantasy here rather than with reality. Again, they were wrong in the 1930s and 40s when they allowed President Roosevelt to do nothing and keep people out who could have helped America. They're wrong now when they're trying to bring people in who want to harm America and harm the Jewish community as well. They're consistently wrong. It's unfortunate and sad to say. But that's the price when you put ideology over reality. The results are very ugly, always. And, you know, it can sometimes be suicidal. My guess is Trump is going to pull it off because he's in fact not who the opposition say he is. I think PC is the major issue that got him elected. People were sick of PC. You saw there was an article in the Wall Street Journal by Shelby Steele. He was called a racist. He just rolled his eyes. And the old attacks that used to shut people up, the denunciations, the threats, don't have the effect that they would have on anybody else. And if one guy can get away with it, everybody can get away with it. And so that shifts the whole dynamic. It completely short-circuits the system. I think you say that's why people are so upset. Because many people have had careers under the old system, sexist, racist, homophobe, Islamophobe, just going around denouncing people. You have people in newspapers, you know, they don't have many reporters anymore, but they have fact checkers. What's a fact checker? Fact checker is a censor who says you can't say this, you can't say that, you can't say the other thing. That's a job that they used to have again in the old Soviet Union, but it wasn't something newspapers had because I have my story, you have your story, make up your mind, pick the paper you like best. We'll see who has the most credibility, but they now identify with the authorities rather than with the readers. And in fact, they don't seem to mind declining circulation. You know, it's a phenomenon that's amazing as well. So Trump, here's the other point about Trump. He's a known quantity. People knew him. He was a celebrity. He was on The Apprentice. People joked he was elected so he could say to bureaucrats, "You're fired." But for 14 years, the average American who watched TV knows Donald Trump. So anything the media says about him is checked by the knowledge of who he was. So that's a tremendous backstop. That's a insurance policy that others didn't have. If you came from nowhere, you depended on the narrative. But people don't need a narrative because they have their own experience. So experience is stronger than myth. So I would say, contra even someone like Richard Nixon, Trump has much more freedom of movement. It's going to be much tougher. They said Reagan was the Teflon president. You could say Trump's the Kevlar president. I mean, things don't just bounce. Mud doesn't just not stick to him, but I would say he's pretty much bulletproof. I mean, God forbid, probably not against a real assassination attempt, but anything short of that, I think he probably is because everyone knows exactly who he is. Anyone who's watched him on TV, anybody who listens to any of his speeches, or who I watched about a dozen of his rallies on YouTube. They were very fascinating. The other thing is, let's talk about New York City again. Credibility. He was introduced by Rudy Giuliani. Well, who's Rudy Giuliani? Rudy Giuliani was the mayor of New York who, in the opinion of New Yorkers like myself, saved New York. New York was really almost totally destroyed when David Dinkins was mayor. I mean, you had riots, you had pogroms, businesses were leaving, nothing worked. And Giuliani came in and he said, clean up that subway car. And the graffiti disappeared. He said, don't cross against the light. People stopped crossing against the light. All he had to do was show he cared, and the city became beautiful. Flowers were planted in medians, sidewalks were cleaned, crime was reduced, and guess what? Business came back, because crime and poverty and despair are bad for business. Peace and good government are good for business, you know, and it's obvious. And so the common sense attitude was reflected when Giuliani was introducing Trump at the rallies. He will do for America what Giuliani did for New York. And if he does half as well as Giuliani, it'll be fine.
When we celebrate our 250 years of glorious freedom, we will look back on tonight as when this new chapter of American greatness began. The time for small thinking is over. The time for trivial fights is behind us. We just need the courage to share the dreams that fill our hearts, the bravery to express the hopes that stir our souls, and the confidence to turn those hopes and those dreams into action. From now on, America will be empowered by our aspirations, not burdened by our fears, inspired by the future, not bound by failures of the past, and guided by a vision, not blinded by our doubts. I am asking all citizens to embrace this renewal of the American spirit. I am asking all members of Congress to join me in dreaming big and bold and daring things for our country. I am asking everyone watching tonight to seize this moment, believe in yourselves, believe in your future, and believe once more in America. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless the United States.